Okay, folks, welcome to this discussion as trying to move towards regeneration. As you can see, we've added one piece to this screen. That's the Hojo piece, which I thought was such a wonderful word, as a way to be here in a way that we are one with all of creation. So last week, we discussed systemic design. We looked at the economy as a human-made system, and as such, therefore, something that we are able to design, a design project, if you will. So we're looking into methodologies for this design. We presented systemic design last week, which is a combination of design thinking, or I should say an upgrade of design thinking with systems thinking combined. And we left the discussion with the questions. Is systemic design sufficient for regeneration? Some of the questions that had arisen to me, I don't have the answers, were, does systemic design support life with capital L, the way we discuss it in the regeneration community? Does it create healthy living systems? And does it create co-thriving with non-human living things? And so today, or rather this week, we're going to do a little bit of math. Why not, right? So our goal this week or today is to solve that equation at the bottom. What must we add to systemic design in order to produce regenerative design? So let's see how far we can go in answering that mathematical equation. And if we don't solve it today, it's homework for all of you. There you go. Okay, Pam is here visiting me. She's been here for the last 2 days. We have been doing New York City on foot, mostly on foot. So on Sunday, we went to my most favorite museum. It's the Museum of Design, the Cooper Hewitt Smithsonian Museum of Design. It is the only museum, as far as I know, in the United States that is dedicated to design itself. And since that's our topic, I thought it was relevant to bring it in here. Design is now becoming as prominent as other fields of practice. It's not so much a field of study, really, yet. That's my opinion, but it is a field of practice. And so it is being brought in to partner with technology, engineering, and everything else. So this museum houses different exhibits, different, usually participatory type of exhibitions where we look at old or historic as well as current designs in order to achieve positive social outcomes, social environmental outcomes. It was a wonderful exhibit. And believe it or not, one of the exhibits was designing peace. And I thought the way they described it was so on point with the things that we discuss here. So designing peace, or the way to design peace, the design aspect itself, is about bringing life-affirming long-term approaches, not just pathological approaches where we say it's about security or increased defense or increased militarization, but a positive approach where we say it's about safety, well-being, and dignity for all. And similarly, or most importantly, it's not a static process in the sense that we've delivered peace to you and we're all done, but that it is a dynamic process that must be built in to the outcome itself, such that it nurtures and sustains life for all, not just regular life or not just survival, but dignified, ongoing life. It is about thriving, not about surviving. That's one of the very key points in the regeneration discussion, is that life is not just about surviving, it's about thriving. So jumping from that to our topics, that ongoing topics. So if we keep all of that in mind, What is a regenerative business? What is our design responsibility for a regenerative business? Now, if you look at that diagram, the orange circle is a new business that has inserted, it's a startup, if you will, that's born into a context, into the web of life. So think of it as an insertion and intervention. Now, this diagram you've seen now several times, and even the words intervention you've heard several times. So what is our design responsibility? Knowing that every insertion intervention is an intervention into the web of life, and we wish to achieve regenerative outcomes. So first of all, that business must play nice with the whole. It's coming in with new inputs, new outputs, et cetera, but it must play nice with the whole. But that is not a subservient role. It is not as though the context says, here are the rules, you got to follow them, and if you don't, you're out. No, the new business itself generates newness in the web of life, in the context. So it is co-creating, co-participating, even in its newness. What that says is that every regenerative outcome is a new outcome that is co-created by the new participant with the context itself. You can say it is a co-learning, co-designing, co-generating practice. And the result of this insertion must be that the context, which was hopefully a healthy living system, continues to be a healthy living system. Yeah. So what that really says here is that new inserted business must embed itself into the context with a sense of belonging. That sense of belonging results in a sense of responsibility, a desire to understand where it's coming in, what it needs to do, what its citizenship role is within that context. But that's not enough. So imagine this scenario. We've got, let's say, New York City. A new business comes in. Okay, it's done a wonderful job of understanding what the environment or the culture of New York City is. But that is not enough, because the culture of New York City is moving. It's changing every minute, every second. The business, if it is to continue to be healthy for itself and for its environment, must also be able to evolve. Evolve along with this context, but evolve such that it is thriving for itself as well. Yeah. So it is really, once again, about that combination of autonomy, as in I need to thrive, and community, as in I recognize that you need to thrive and what is needed for you to thrive. That porous boundary. That's what it's about. So now, are we ready to answer this question? I know that was very quick, but it seems to me that the systemic design toolkit, even though it has systems thinking in it, so it has a view of the whole, but it is still about this new business only. It's a one-way discussion where the new business says, what do I need? What do I need to do? And that's it. That's where the discussion stops. It doesn't say, am I leaving a healthy ecosystem behind? That is not some of the questions it asks. It is still the intervention-centric, not whole-centric. It is also not evolutionary except in the sense of allowing the new business to survive. So there is a higher level of consideration, discussion, capability that is required for systemic design to become regenerative. Yeah. So I'm going to go step back to the previous slide again. And if we look at the last 2 points on this slide, which means that those 2 points, it seems like a subtle point. But if we think long term, we realize that it is not enough for a business to come in and say, here I am, I need to survive and thrive. So I understand that I need to fit in to the context. That is not enough. It needs to also recognize that since it is embedded into the context, it must give to the context what it needs in order to get back what it needs. Again, that sounds awfully transactional, but I don't really mean it that way. It's much more in a holistic way through feedback loops that it gets what is needed. It is indeed a higher level, evolved way of looking at how business sits within its context. And that is the one piece that is missing here. So I'm going to open that up for discussion a little bit later if you think I have covered all of the points to answer that question mark or not. But before I open it up, one last piece to consider is the economy itself. We've been discussing all the properties of complex systems for now 8 months. And we've discussed in the last few weeks that the economy is a human-made commons. It is an emergent commons, meaning we don't create it, it emerges. We cannot create the economy except through the other actions we do. So we're neither directly interacting with the economy, meaning I can't go to the economy and buy something or sell something. I'm buying and selling from individuals and organizations. And these activities are creating an emergent commons called the economy. So the design methodology for something that we are not directly creating must be entirely different. And I hypothesize, I put to you that systemic design cannot answer that question. It cannot answer the question of what is the design responsibility for the creation of a regenerative economy? Because the question really is, how do you design for an emergent commons? So that's not part of the question mark here. So, but I wanted to bring to your attention that these sessions are about the economy, and it is different than the business itself. But we, all of us here, most of us operate at the regenerative business level, but we are here to discuss the regenerative economy and what our role is in creating that. In fact, what we can say is, now here's the discussion prompt for today. What guidelines should we design for business to be regenerative? So we've discussed that regeneration is a step beyond systemic design. What guidelines, what toolkit, what principles do we need for business to become regenerative? What guidelines do we need to ensure that our business activities generate an emergent regenerative economy? What metrics should we design to ensure that indeed the emergent economy is being regenerative? And what, most importantly, what institutions should we design for that? That's it from a slides perspective, but I wanted to raise to you, and maybe we'll bring this up for discussion next week, but there's an excellent interview of Larry Summer by John Stewart. You can find it on YouTube. And Larry Summers, if you remember, I think he was Treasury Secretary for a while. He says over and over again that the levers that we had only allowed us to do X, Y, Z. What that says to us is there are certain institutions, or I would say institutions, that are missing in order for us to have the ability for us to, let's say, manage the economy the way we need it to be managed, keeping in mind that this is a human-created system. Yep. Thank you all.
Thank you, Tanuja. And Dave has asked if you can copy and paste the questions into the chat.
Sure.
And I also, there's a lot of interesting conversation going on in the chat as well. So Catherine writes, the context is the system of patterns nature uses to ensure thriving. Are we looking at a new economy or a clearer ecology? So, Catherine, can you explain what you mean by clearer ecology?
Well, I'm kind of wondering if we're using the wrong words. It's trying to design a new thing from the old context. And we're really trying to become an ecology. We're trying to support each other in the same way that other plants support each other in an ecology. And to Tanuja's point, that the path, in my opinion, for business is to understand impact, not just profit, because the impact is the connection to the rest of the community. And so to vision for impact instead of vision for profit, which we never got, I have to say, after years and years of working with businesses to vision, mission, and values, they never got that their vision is about the greater whole. It's all about me being bigger and better, and that never worked. So understanding what impact you want to have, what difference you want to make, what contribution you're giving to the greater whole, begins to align that business with the rest of the plants around them in an ecological sense, where you begin to interact from that perspective and begin to see and pay attention to what happens when you do what you do, and then adjust it so that it supports the impact that you want to make, which is an improvement or a contribution in some kind of way. Social entrepreneurs have started that, but it is so easy to get hooked back into the separate power over thing. Even the discussion of we're designing is a power over conversation. It's not about evoking. It's not about being in relationship. It's about making decisions for others in some kind of way, and maybe being nice about it, but it's not really the engagement. If you're designing with, if you're living with and being responsive in that process, then the design is something that happens. It's not something you do. It's something that just evolves out of the interactions as you work to improve your relationship and your own status at the same time. It's a both and. So the thought of being able to create in whole cloth from our minds what we are hoping to achieve is sort of the old style all over again.
Yeah, I think that in trying to pay more attention, what I notice is that design emerges from function, from necessity, from from what is needed. So what you need plus what you have at hand equals what comes together for the next step. Daniel, welcome. You are on mute.
Thank you. Yeah, now I'm. Thank you. It's the first time I'm here. Thank you for having me. I just got the invitation this week, and it's a pleasure to be amongst with you. I'd like to bring a question. Maybe it's a step back question, and I'm not sure if this question is possible here, or if it's a place to put this. I wonder if we are using the word design or the concept of design or the whole mental structure that we bring with us as a design with the same understanding. Meaning, when I think about design, I hardly can think about something that emerges. I normally think design as much more an intentional, a driven way of expect for objectives and goals and aims, much more than flow naturally like a leaf in a river. And in this sense, my point would be, can we understand the outcome of a design as an emergence, or we should call it much more cybernetic way? That would be my question to raise.
Daniel, this
Much
is-
more
Oh, cybernetic. He said cybernetic way.
cybernetic.
Yeah. So Daniel, wonderful, fine point to raise. But I'd like to point out that the way you've defined design right now is really engineering design. And I'm an engineer myself. But if you look at the way a painter designs or a musician designs, it's very much they're listening to emergence. They're flowing with emergence. But it's not a skill that is taught to the rest of us. Here in the rest of us, we are supposed to use our brains, our intention to drive. And I think even the profit-centric capitalistic way of doing business is also about drive, because somehow there's an assumption that if you don't drive, then you will end up in a place that is not good for you. So this, in my opinion, is a pathological model of life itself, where if you're not doing something, you're going to be sick, you're going to be weak, you're going to be poor, all that stuff. And that is not true. It is simply a way we think about things, right? So life is evolutionary. Nature is evolutionary. It's not pulling you backwards. But that is an error in our model, human models. And that's what we're trying to change. I, for example, would like all engineers to take some amount of education in some of the creative arts, like painting or dance or music, something like that, in order to feel the emergence inside themselves. Because there's no way to teach that, I think, unless you felt it.
Other thoughts? Van, could you expand on transcendental design? Are you available to talk with us this morning?
Hi, everyone. Yeah, thank you so much. Let me really thinking. This is right now, a lot of ideas coming to my mind. I'm also thinking about this ontological design. If anybody knows the concept that design us back, design life back. So, yeah, let me think about it. I know I speak again. Sorry, but thank you.
Okay, sure.
I mean, I'm kind of curious. I feel like we keep, the systems, the problem for me of trying to understand a lot of systems thinking and regenerative design or whatever it is you're kind of trapped between this notion that I'm going to choose to act to do something that I want to have happen, and the notion that the system's too complicated, I can't make a choice, or my choice won't do what I intended to do, or, right? This is kind of the argument we're trapped in, and the complexity stuff is like, well, the system is really complex, you can't understand it, and yet I still want to act, so what do I do? And so I'm not going to quite give up the notion that I want to act yet. but the notion of design seems a little bit prescriptive, that I'm going to decide what I'm going to do, therefore I'm going to decide what's going to happen if I do something and then when I act. And I feel like we somehow have to get closer and closer so that our action and the reaction are really tightly aligned, you know? And so, I mean, I still think there is a design component, but really that's why I've been falling back on the word learning or something. It's like I need to engage so that I learn and react, so that I engage, so that I learn and react. You know, it's much more of a very rapid cycling or something like that. And yet I need like a concept of regeneration, which is this big, broad wish in the world, right, as a North Star. So I'm going to act and react. And what I really want to have happen is this regeneration thing somewhere off in the future. And I don't know, I end up kind of trapped in between those two things, but my desire to act anyway brings me to this, you know, so it's not, so there, I guess there is a design in choosing how to act, but it's not a grand design. It's something very close to me. And so that actually brings me, I stuck a little bit in the chat about autonomy, because to me, autonomy may be really important in this, and that I need to act within my own realm of control, right? I need to be very centered. And to me, that helped understand why my autonomy means I need to have my internal regeneration, because one is that's the area I have the most control, is myself. So regenerating myself is one of the places where I should be able to do the best in theory. And also that drives my decisions then for whatever I'm going to do within my interaction. And so local, you know, we should, I think there's always this evidence that we need, this argument that we need to do things locally. And it's like, well, yeah, I don't know. But if I use the autonomy argument, it makes more sense to me, because I have more autonomy locally than I personally, as an actor. I can interact with my local space better, you know. And so there is a good reason to do local things, even if local things aren't necessarily the best things. They're the ones I have the most autonomy in, I guess, is what I end up with. So I don't know if any of that makes sense to you guys, but this is kind of where my head's been going. And then I stuck it in the chat. I looked up the definition of autonomy when you mentioned it, Tanuja, and I hadn't really thought. I always thought of autonomy kind of as self-governance, and I hadn't seen the Kantian, you know, constraint on morality kind of that's in the definition on Google. And I was thinking, oh, that's an interesting tension between, you know, self-government, but with a morality. And so I feel like that's kind of the tension we're playing with a lot. It's like, you know, I want to act in a way that's good, kind of.
Oh, you know, the theory of moral sentiment comes to mind, Adam Smith, because before he wrote The Wealth of Nations, he wrote The Theory of Moral Sentiment. And what folks don't necessarily know, although I try to mention it whenever I can, is that Adam Smith, who's considered the grandfather of capitalism, had such a core moral sensibility, and he actually assumed that the morals of his time and place would carry forward and would always serve as the guardrails for unfettered capitalism. That it would always be, they didn't need to worry about the fact that capitalism had no morals and no values, because it would always be imposed by the religious order of the day. That just the belief that religion was the only way, and that it would always control everything. And of course, we know what happened in that story. And so I think, Dave, you said a lot of really valuable things, because that thinking about like the progressive way, called progressives, is really about autonomy, and not trying to impose your will on somebody else. And so you keep your own area under control, and not try to force others to agree with you or believe the exact same thing, just so long, you know, what is that saying about something about your freedom stops at the tip of my nose or something. That, but I think all of that is in play here, and I'm fundamentally opposed to somebody designing something that then is superimposed on me. I don't think that's the kind of design we want to be thinking about. That's my 2 cents.
Yeah, I agree with you, Pam, that it's not about imposition, but keeping in mind that if I do anything, I'm also imposing on the environment, which then imposes on you. See?
Well,
So there
now
is
that's where we are now.
regardless.
Ironically, for the first several thousand years of humans on the planet, I could do a whole big bunch to the environment without it affecting you. So this is where I think design really becomes a function of the reality of the times, and that is a piece. So your algebraic equation, I think, needs more than 2 parts. You know, I think.
Oh, you mean we need?
That
Oh, I see. Do we need like third order calculus in there? I can bring that in.
Well, you know, we need parentheses
discussion.
with times is inside.
Yeah. All right, next time you're going to see a much longer equation. So Dave, the point you brought up about design and so on, I think a really good illustration is what's called the samurai walk. So the question is, how does the samurai go from point A to point B? How does he walk from point A to B? He doesn't just say, okay, there's B, let me start walking and keep my eyes focused on B. What he says is, there's B, I need to get there. He starts walking, looks left, looks right. And then as he looks left and looks right, he's adjusting to what's going on, such that he may end up at B, but he may end up at C, depending on what he's picked up along the way. But the key point here is he still starts with an idea of B. That's where design comes in. We design to the best of our ability to something, but where we're designing is always from where we are now. That's the crazy bit. 6 months later, we're going to be a different place.
But where we're going is what we keep the ultimate.
That shifts. That shifts.
Oh, so the destiny B shifts.
Yes. So B is not so much a destination as it is a desired functionality. If B is a destination, that's what I call pothole filling. You know, filling the potholes in a road, which is really not a good way to build a road. So, but Colleen, please.
Yeah, I was just thinking that maybe if we, as we're looking right and left, what we're looking for is externalities, like the impact that we're having. What is our impact, you know, on the outside and whatever. So if we are designing, like for instance, in our village, we're going to be designing a waste management system, and the goal of that waste management system is to send clean water down the canyon. So we don't want to send polluted water down the canyon. So our goal then is to clean up any pollution and whatever in the water system as we send the water down the canyon. So being aware of each part of that waste management system is going to have, you know, as a samurai is walking forward, he's looking, okay, is this going to cause a problem downstream? And then look this way, is this, economically viable and kind of having some kind of a dynamic tension between values and whatever as you move forward. But I think that honestly, it's where we've gone wrong with all of our technological stuff in our current age is we're not concerned with the externalities, and we need to be.
They aren't
By
external.
reconnecting the feedback loops.
Mhm. That exactly. Well said, Colleen. The ignorance of externalities is the willful ignorance of externalities is at the heart of the problem, most certainly. And I hasten to add that it's only recently we've needed to take those into consideration in our designing, because for the first thousands of years, impact was minimal. And it has only been in the last 200 years that we have hit a size, a scale where we actually polluted and impacted. So we're relatively new to this, where we need to worry about downstream.
Yeah, well,
that a little bit.
I just think about our trails that we have here in Utah. There's a little sign that's usually there. It said, if it's here, leave it. If you brought it, take it out. So, and that's a reminder to be conscious of the externalities that you're creating.
Yeah,
wondered
I
about
felt some, yeah. Dave.
Oh, well, I'm sorry to break it. I guess because there were two sides to this to me. Like, one is the externalities concept, of course, means there is something external too, right? So we're removed outside of the system. So the very concept is, I think, problematic in a regenerative framing. But to me, I translate, it is the term in our traditional framing that we would use to help understand the bad impact. So there is an attempt in our current system to try to understand the bad impact, but it's an othering kind of term. And so, and I don't know what, again, I'm trying to learn into how I grapple with this notion of externalities, because they should be part of me, kind of, or something, right? I mean, this is where I end up reading Sand Talk or something as like the best ways to try to grok some of these things that I'm still struggling. But also this idea that we didn't, it's only 200 years ago that we needed to, I keep coming back to, like, people say you shouldn't burn oil. And it's like, well, do you remember what we burned before we burned petroleum?
Yeah, whale oil.
Animal fat.
Right? We burned whales. And I just got done visiting, the Mayan ruins. I think they had to abandon the ruins because they ran out of water, right? I mean, or soil. It's a little unclear whether they destroyed the soil first or they ran out of water first, right? So, and that was far before 200 years ago. So we've been going through this cycle, I'd say, for a long, long time. It may be that we've lost cultural memory in the processes sometimes. But, you look at Egypt,
though,
and
Dave,
what it's suffering, much more than hundreds of years old, right? So.
Yes, only I would call this we've hit a critical mass. I think that I totally agree with you. These smaller civilizations crashed and burned for very similar reasons, but because it didn't impact the whole globe, the lessons were harder to transfer, and so they died with the Mayans, or they died with whoever. But now we have a critical mass where what we do in New York affects literally everywhere else, and that critical mass is what is forcing forcing the question, which comes back to an earlier point of how I believe we have been designing, maybe not on the fly, but often on the fly, in the moment, based on exactly what was needed for this specific set of circumstances that really didn't impact others enough to have it be a forced component. We're now, these components are being forced into the design equation because everything is impacting everything else. So that we're needing to change. We're needing to think differently. And I don't think that very much of the old system is going to ultimately be salvageable. Frankly, I really don't. I'm not sure business, a 21st century capital business, is going to be able to figure out how to become regenerative. I think it's going to need a whole new way of human community thriving. Yeah.
You were mentioning using a word, old system. I wonder if we are equally able to draw a line with clear boundaries between what's old and what's not old, in your example.
Oh, yes. So individual profit, only thinking about yourself and your business and you becoming successful and you doing well just for you without having to think of anybody else or any of the, call it whatever you want, the externalities, for lack of a better term, that you're creating. I would say that that would define the old that I'm thinking of.
So you were quoting
off the cuff.
You're quoting Adam
Pardon
Smith
me?
in this case. You're quoting Adam Smith. It's his definition of liberal.
I'm saying we can't stay utterly self-centered. I don't think that capitalism at its core was about you can be utterly self-centered, think of nobody else but yourself, and by only thinking of yourself, you'll be helping the whole. And that turns out to not actually be true at the scale we're operating at now.
Never true.
That's what I'm suggesting. So old business model means only thinking of yourself and maximizing your own profit.
Dan, how would you come back to that clarification? Daniel.
Yeah, in broad terms, I must agree, but I'm still thinking, like, trying to think more accurately in terms of if we can gather with old business people trying to design new models, new ways of thinking, new ways of regenerate our communities, our environments, our territories. Because if we cannot draw clear lines, we will be trapped into inconsistent methodologies, into inconsistent epistemologies that leads us to poor theories of understanding. And if we cannot understand what we are trying to say, and if we cannot understand what we are trying to stand for, what are you doing? That would be my question. That was the background of the question I put before.
Well,
So to that, I would say that, yes, we do need to have some clarity on what we are doing or what we're asking about. But I want to remind everyone that the economy that we're with today was not designed by a set of people who sat down and said, let's think of this whole first.
exactly.
Do things. It came about bits and pieces, bits and pieces, bits and pieces. So as we think about switching, moving away, we don't have to know everything right away. But we do not need to know something before we start. And then we need to have that learning feedback loop, a very strong learning feedback loop.
So I would suggest that the key is relationship and right relationship, because that's what's been sort of weeded out of the system over time, actually. Early on, when you knew your neighbors and you lived with your neighbors, and it made a big difference whether your neighbors were healthy or not, because you could see the drag
On the whole community,
and we
right?
do not have that feedback loop at this point in time, but we still have the capacity to be in relationship. We just have to do that. There is actually a movement, and I think, Tunisia, you've talked about it in the past, of redoing contracts from the point of view of right relationship. Some of the largest companies are actually, when they started to partner, discovered that they needed to want the other to thrive instead of protecting themselves from the other. That's a big shift. And that's, I mean, so it's really doable. It is very doable. We just have to start caring about the other and develop the trust that will allow us to know what the other needs. Because if the other is protecting itself from us and worried that we're going to take advantage of what we know, then you can't have that kind of right relationship. So the trust has to be really built, and it's only built over time and through experience. And it's only really there when it's tested and you survive the test by actually thinking of the other and the other can see it. Otherwise, we're just sort of hoping and praying that that's going to happen in the end. But we really need to have those experiences. So those feedback loops are strongly there, that we can indeed trust that the other will care for us. And maybe even at a detriment, a temporary detriment to self. That's the key. Because the minute you pull back to do only for yourself, then that trust gets broken. You know, you have to absorb the pain that it takes to be in right relationship.
Yeah,
Catherine,
I
there's so
I
many
can
things.
kind of see how that plays out actually, because it's you know, it's it seems to me that in trust building, you know, it isn't something that happens all at once. I mean, you can go into a relationship expecting to be trusting and to be trustworthy, but there's always a sort of testing period, you know, and when the sun's shining is not necessarily when you build trust, it's when it's raining. And when the weather is bad, and and when there's conflict, that's where trust is really built. So yeah, I I I think you're on the right place here.
Yeah, I think that you have to be careful. There is a balance between not becoming codependent. You know, I don't want to ever presume I know what you need, Catherine. I think that is that.
You have to ask. We have to trust enough to ask. We have blind trust. Blind trust says, I know, I believe, I hope, but I don't dare ask. And if you can't ask, you don't truly trust. If you don't have permission to get the
Well, if
answers that
you
need, you are not in a trusting relationship.
yeah, fair. That's fair, for sure. For sure. Yes, to not presume you know what's best for someone else, because I think that those are the components of our free and democratic system that are worth
They're the
salvaging.
justification for they're the justification for manipulation.
Well, possibly, but they also, in right relationship, they that mutual regard for someone else to be different and have different choices than you, I think
Absolutely.
is well worth salvaging.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
the freedom of religion, freedom of choice, freedom to love who you want to love. Those are things
That's
that
because you
are,
trust. You
but
trust that
actually they often get lost in
yeah.
in these tight communities where everyone needs to act the same and feel the same and worship the same God in order to be allowed. So it's a slippery slope on both sides of this thin road, you know.
I don't think it's slippery at all, actually. I don't. If you
Okay.
take the autonomy to ask questions and get answers, it's that
And then have mutual
we let
respect,
go of,
right?
we let go of that. We let go of that step. Yeah. Yeah. And this illusion of sameness as a way to trust, instead of understanding the
Yeah.
richness of diversity, that you need that difference in order to survive. You can't have sameness. Sameness is
Exactly.
the death trap. Yeah.
And right, and how much corruption is underneath that illusion of sameness. And you guys, I have a client meeting at the top of the hour, so Tanuja is taking the horns here, and I'm trying to push all my biz into this, and so I can vacation later. Thank you all. Lovely conversation. Ciao.
Yeah, I love how, in this session, we get spiritual sometimes, we get philosophical often, and then we stay in the practical side as well. So, that's just what it is, right? Every instance, we're living in all spaces at the same time.
Yep. Dan, thank you for that link. I'll check it out.
Yeah, very much. Thank you. Yeah, but it is the end of the hour, so we do need to close. And perhaps I wanted to raise again to everyone that one of the things we'd like to do is to analyze current media things. It could be an article in the newspaper, it could be something on online site somewhere that is about the economy or business, and see what it looks like from a regenerative lens, just as a way for us to bring things to life. And one of the slight goals, or very at the moment not quite clear goal, is to potentially rewrite such media articles from a regenerative lens as a group and put it out there. It's something, yeah, yes, Fan, I saw your thumb there. That would something we would like to do. Sort of we could have even a pseudonym for all of us as authors. And put it out there. So
I've got to hop off as well to something else, but I was thinking about your samurai walk thing, and I would say as a designer, more of an inventor, one of the things you want to do is like try and work back as well as forwards. So rather than just walking forwards, you're also trying to work out, well, how do I get from where I'm looking at to somewhere closer? So what's you're trying to work both ways and find out what's the minimum gap that you have to cross, so you're trying to make sure that you're dealing with a short distance to solve your problem and not the remainder of the entire journey. So I think you need to combine a couple of ideas and then see what the small steps people can actually get their heads around are.
and I
most of the
have
problems
a
too big.
hypothesis. I have a hypothesis that the size of the step is about right relationship. So the size of step
it could well be.
is different than you.
I
Yeah,
think
so
that's why we're here.
yeah. So okay, wonderful. Thanks very much.
That's nice,
everybody.
Kevin, because it also mimics the 7 generations thing, right? That you have to go back and forth. So I like that.
See you next time.
See you next time, everyone. Thank you.